I refuse to breathe recycled air next to that type of person for 7 hours. The words sliced through the hushed atmosphere of the JFK first-class lounge like a blade through silk. Every head in the premium waiting area turned toward the voice. It belonged to Victoria Ashworth, a woman who had spent 42 years perfecting the art of looking expensive. Standing near the boarding gate for Skylight Airways Flight SE447 to London, she radiated the kind of polished elegance that money could buy and breeding could fake. Victoria's platinum blonde hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders, styled that morning at a salon that charged more per hour than most people earned in a day. Her cream-colored Chanel blazer hugged her figure with mathematical precision, paired with a silk blouse the color of champagne and a pencil skirt that cost more than a car payment. Red-soled Louboutin heels clicked against the marble floor with each calculated step, and a tennis bracelet worth 6 figures caught the light as she gestured dramatically with her phone. She wasn't born into this world. Victoria Ashworth had clawed her way up from a middle-class family in suburban Connecticut, transforming herself into the image of old money sophistication. Every designer label, every perfectly manicured nail, every practiced smile was armor in a war she'd been fighting since college. Now, as Senior Vice President of Acquisitions at Whitfield and Associates, one of Manhattan's most prestigious investment firms, she had finally reached the altitude where she belonged. At least that's what she told herself every morning in the mirror of her Upper East Side penthouse. This morning was different, though. This morning carried the weight of 20 years of ambition compressed into a single meeting. In exactly 8 hours, Victoria would walk into a London boardroom to finalize the biggest merger of the decade. If she landed the Reynolds Financial Group acquisition, she would be named partner. If she failed, well, failure had never been an option for Victoria Ashworth. She checked her Cartier Santos watch, a reward to herself for closing the Henderson deal last quarter. 7:45 a.m. Boarding would begin in 15 minutes. She smoothed her already perfect blazer and gathered her Louis Vuitton carry-on, the one with her initials embossed in gold. Everything had to be perfect today. Everything had to maintain standards. Standards. That word had become Victoria's personal mantra, her North Star, her justification for every choice she made. She maintained standards in her appearance, her associations, her environment. Standards were what separated people like her from people like, well, everyone else. The boarding announcement crackled over the intercom, spoken in that practiced airline voice that managed to sound both professional and bored. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now beginning first class and business class boarding for Skylight Airways Flight SE447 to London Heathrow. Welcome aboard. Victoria rose from her leather chair with the grace of someone who had studied every movement, every gesture that signaled success. She breezed past the lines of tired families in economy, past the business travelers clutching their coffee like lifelines straight to the premium boarding lane. The gate agent, a young woman with dark circles under her eyes from the early shift, scanned Victoria's boarding pass with mechanical efficiency. Welcome aboard, Ms. Ashworth. You're in seat 2B today. Victoria didn't acknowledge the greeting. She simply swept past her heels, announcing her arrival to anyone within 50 feet. The jet bridge stretched ahead like a tunnel to her future, and at the end of it waited the sanctuary of first class where she belonged. The aircraft itself was a Boeing 7771 of Skylight's flagship long-haul jets. The first-class cabin was Victoria's natural habitat, soft lighting that made everyone look 10 years younger, seats that could transform into beds, and enough space between rows to conduct business or simply exist without touching the common masses. This was her domain, her refuge from the chaos of economy class and the disappointments of real life. She scanned the cabin as she entered, noting with satisfaction that it was mostly empty. A few business executives buried behind copies of the Financial Times, a young tech entrepreneur in an expensive hoodie, tapping on what looked like a prototype tablet, an elderly couple sharing quiet conversation over pre-flight champagne. These were her people. These were the standards. And then she saw row 2, seat 2. The window seat next to her assigned aisle seat was occupied. The woman sitting there appeared to be in her early 30s with beautiful dark skin and intricately braided hair that fell over her shoulders in a style that spoke of both tradition and sophistication. She was dressed simply, but expensively, a charcoal cashmere turtleneck that probably cost more than Victoria's shoes, tailored black trousers that suggested a European designer, and no visible logos anywhere on her person. The woman was reading a hardcover book, her noise-canceling headphones resting around her neck like a necklace. She looked peaceful, absorbed in her reading, completely unaware that her mere presence was about to shatter Victoria's carefully constructed world. Victoria stopped in the aisle, her grip on her leather bag tightening until her knuckles turned white. It wasn't just that someone was sitting next to her. In her mind, first class was reserved for a very specific type of person. People who looked like her, talked like her, came from backgrounds that she respected. The woman in 2A didn't fit that profile, and in Victoria's worldview that was unacceptable. She stared at her boarding pass, checking the seat number twice. 2B, right there printed in stark black letters. Then she looked at the woman again, noting every detail with the calculating eye of someone who had spent her career assessing worth and value. The woman sensed the scrutiny and glanced up, offering a polite, close-lipped smile before returning to her book. That dismissal was the spark that lit Victoria's fuse. The woman wasn't deferential. She wasn't apologetic. She wasn't making any attempt to shrink or disappear or acknowledge that Victoria might have a problem with her presence. She was simply existing comfortably and confidently in a space that Victoria believed should be reserved for people who met her standards. Victoria didn't move to stow her bag. She didn't sit down. Instead, she turned sharply and marched back toward the galley, her heels clicking an angry rhythm against the aircraft floor. The head flight attendant was there preparing the welcome drinks with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this routine thousands of times. Maya Santos looked up from the champagne bottles she was organizing. At 35, she had 15 years of airline experience under her belt, and she could read passengers like books. The sharp-featured woman approaching her radiated the kind of entitlement that usually meant trouble. "Good morning, ma'am. Can I help you find your seat?" Victoria's voice dropped to what she believed was a confidential whisper, but it carried clearly through the first 3 rows of the cabin. "I've found my seat, and there seems to be a mistake." Maya consulted her tablet, swiping through the passenger manifest with practiced fingers. "Ms. Ashworth, seat 2B. That's correct according to our system. Is there a mechanical issue with the seat?" "Not mechanical," Victoria said, leaning closer. "Situational. I specifically requested a seat with privacy, and you've placed me next to someone who doesn't fit the environment I paid for." Maya's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She had heard this language before, knew exactly what "doesn't fit the environment" meant in Victoria speak. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand." "You mean another passenger?" Victoria huffed a sound that managed to convey both frustration and condescension. "I mean, I am not comfortable with that seating arrangement." "The person in 2A. I don't think it's appropriate. I need to be moved. I maintain standards, and this airline should maintain standards too." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Maya set down the champagne bottle she had been holding, her movements deliberate and controlled. She had worked for airlines long enough to recognize discrimination when it was dressed up in polite language. Miss Ashworth, Maya said, her voice professional but cooling by degrees. "The flight is completely sold out. Every seat in first class and business class is occupied. I cannot move you to a different location." Victoria's face flushed pink, starting at her perfectly contoured cheekbones and spreading toward her hairline. "Check again." "I don't need to check. You're telling me that in this entire aircraft there's not one single seat available for a Diamond Medallion member? I practically pay your salary with my loyalty to this airline." Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, our records show every seat occupied. You're assigned to 2B, and that's your seat for this flight." "Do you know who I am?" Victoria's voice rose slightly, causing other passengers to glance in their direction. "I am Victoria Ashworth of Whitfield and Associates. I close deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm flying to London on business that will probably fund this airline for the next 6 months, and I am telling you that I refuse to sit next to that woman." The cabin had grown quiet, except for the ambient hum of the aircraft's systems. Maya felt the weight of other passengers' attention, saw phones being discreetly lifted to capture whatever was about to unfold. "Ms. Ashworth," Maya said carefully, "are you refusing to take your assigned seat because of the other passengers' race?" Victoria's response came too quickly, too loudly. "I am refusing because I paid for a premium experience, not to be seated next to someone who clearly doesn't belong here. This is about standards, not race. I maintain standards in every aspect of my life, and I expect this airline to maintain standards too." Back in seat 2. A doctor. Amara Williams had heard every word. She hadn't turned around, hadn't gasped, hadn't made any visible reaction. She simply turned the page of her book, a first edition of Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye that she had acquired at an auction in Geneva, and continued reading. But her heart was hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. At 32, Dr. Williams had encountered this type of person many times before. As one of the youngest department heads at Columbia University, and now a private consultant for international mergers and acquisitions, she had walked into boardrooms where people assumed she was the caterer. She had been handed car keys by valets while waiting for her own Porsche. She had been questioned about her credentials so many times that she now carried extra copies of her degrees in her briefcase. Today, though, she was tired. Bone tired. She was flying to London to close a complex chapter of her career, finalizing the acquisition of an investment firm that would give her control over nearly $1 billion in assets. All she wanted was to sleep, to read her book, to arrive in London refreshed and ready for what would be the most important meeting of her professional life. She felt Victoria's heavy footsteps returning to row 2, accompanied by the sharp clicking of expensive heels. Victoria didn't sit down. Instead, she loomed over Amara's seat like a storm cloud, her expensive perfume cloying and aggressive. "Excuse me," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false politeness. "You're blocking my access to the overhead compartment." There was plenty of room in the aisle. Amara didn't move, but she lowered her book and looked up calmly. "I don't believe I am." Victoria leaned down, bringing her face uncomfortably close to Amara's. "Look, I don't know how you got this seat. Maybe it was an upgrade. Maybe it was some kind of mistake, but I have very important work to do on this flight. Work that requires concentration and appropriate surroundings. Why don't you ask the flight attendant to move you back to economy class? I'm sure you'd be more comfortable with your people." The sheer audacity of the words made the air in the cabin feel electric. Across the aisle, a businessman in a gray suit lowered his newspaper with an audible snap. "Hey," he said, his voice carrying authority. "That's completely inappropriate." Victoria spun toward him, her composure finally cracking. "This is none of your business. This is between me and the airline staff about maintaining appropriate standards." She turned back to Maya, who had followed her down the aisle and now stood witness to the entire exchange. "Well, I'm waiting for a solution. Either find me another seat that meets my standards or move her. I will not sit here. I maintain standards, and this arrangement does not meet my standards." Maya took a deep breath, her years of training kicking in. "Ashworth, please take your assigned seat so we can close the cabin doors and depart on time." No, Victoria's voice cracked like a whip, her careful facade finally shattering completely. "I am not sitting next to a black woman. Is that clear enough for you? I don't want to smell her. I don't want to accidentally touch her armrest. I don't want to look at her for 7 hours. Get her off this plane, or move me to a seat where I don't have to deal with this situation." The word situation hung in the air like a slur. Phones were definitely recording now. Tyler Brooks, a travel influencer sitting in row 4 with nearly 3 million TikTok followers, had his camera trained on the scene streaming live to an audience that was growing by the second. "This is going viral," Tyler whispered to his camera. #StandardsGate people. You're watching racism in real time in first class. The hashtag was born in that moment, and it would be trending worldwide within the hour. Amara finally closed her book and placed it gently on her tray table. She unbuckled her seatbelt and looked directly at Maya. "If my presence is causing this level of disturbance," she said, her voice steady and dignified, "I'm happy to deplane. I don't want to delay the flight for everyone else." "No, ma'am," Maya said, immediately holding up her hand. "You are not going anywhere. You have done absolutely nothing wrong." Maya turned her full attention to Victoria, and her expression could have frozen jet fuel at 30,000 feet. "Ms. Ashworth, you have made your position very clear. You are refusing to sit in your assigned seat because of the passenger in 2A. Is that correct?" "Finally," Victoria huffed, crossing her arms with satisfaction. "Yes, that is absolutely correct. I demand a solution that meets my standards. And you would prefer to be seated away from this passenger? Yes, immediately. You believe you deserve accommodation that reflects your status as a valued customer." Victoria's smile was triumphant. She thought Maya was finally seeing reason, finally understanding that some passengers were more important than others. "Exactly. I knew someone in a position of responsibility would understand the importance of maintaining standards." Maya nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Please wait right here. I need to speak with the captain about this situation." Victoria leaned against an empty seat in row 3, checking her manicured nails and looking victorious. She glanced back at Amara with a look that she probably thought was subtle, but read like a neon sign to everyone watching. "See?" she said to no one in particular, but loud enough for Amara to hear. "Some people understand how these things work when you know how to ask for what you deserve." Amara didn't respond. She picked up her phone and sent a single text message. "Flight delay. Minor issue with passenger seating. Might be 15 minutes late for car service. Apologies. AW." She hit send and returned to her book. But she wasn't really reading. She was watching Maya's face, noting the set of the flight attendant's jaw, the steel in her eyes. Amara had seen that expression before, usually right before someone delivered consequences that would change everything. 5 minutes passed. The tension in the cabin grew thicker with each passing second. Other passengers were openly staring now, whispering among themselves, recording everything. Tyler's live stream had reached 50,000 viewers and climbing. The hashtag #StandardsGate was gaining momentum, spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. Finally, Maya returned. She wasn't alone. Captain Rodriguez appeared beside her, a tall man with silver hair, 4 gold stripes on his shoulders, and the bearing of someone who had spent 25 years in commercial aviation after a distinguished military career. He had dealt with every kind of passenger emergency imaginable, from medical crises to unruly drunks to potential terrorists. But what he had never tolerated, not once in his entire career, was discrimination against his passengers. Captain Rodriguez stopped in front of row 2. He looked at Amara with a respectful nod, noting her calm demeanor and the way she held herself with quiet dignity. Then he turned his full attention to Victoria. "Ms. Ashworth," the captain said, his voice carrying the kind of natural authority that didn't need to be raised to command attention. Victoria straightened up, smoothing her skirt and adjusting her blazer. "Captain Rodriguez, thank God you're here. I assume you've been briefed on the situation and found a solution that maintains appropriate standards." "We have found a solution," Captain Rodriguez confirmed. I've been informed that you are refusing to sit next to the passenger in 2A due to her race. Is that an accurate assessment?" Victoria's smile faltered slightly as she heard her behavior reflected back to her in such stark terms. "I didn't say race specifically. I said I was uncomfortable with the arrangement. It's about maintaining standards and ensuring appropriate passenger placement based on well compatibility." "I understand," Captain Rodriguez said gravely. "You feel strongly that no one should be forced to sit next to someone they find objectionable." Victoria's eyes lit up with relief. "Yes, exactly. A man in your position clearly understands the importance of maintaining standards and ensuring passenger comfort." Therefore, Captain Rodriguez continued raising his voice so that every passenger in first class could hear clearly, "We have arranged for a seat change." Victoria grabbed her Louis Vuitton bag, her face glowing with triumph. "Excellent. I assume it's in one of the private suites. I know those are usually reserved for crew rest, but given the circumstances, I think it's entirely appropriate." Captain Rodriguez didn't move. He kept his eyes locked on Victoria, but gestured toward Amara. "Dr. Williams, if you would please gather your belongings." Victoria's smile grew wider. They were removing the problem. They were kicking the black woman out of first class to accommodate her complaints. It was better than she had dared to hope. Amara stood up, looking genuinely confused by the captain's request. "Captain, you really don't need to." "Dr. Williams?" Captain Rodriguez said warmly. "Please follow me. We have upgraded you to our finest accommodation with our sincere apologies for the behavior you've been subjected to." He picked up Amara's small carry-on bag himself, treating her with the kind of respect usually reserved for heads of state. "We have a private suite at the very front of the aircraft. It's typically reserved for our most valued passengers, and today that's definitely you." Victoria's triumphant expression began to crack around the edges as she processed what she was hearing. "Wait," she said slowly. "Valued passenger. What are you talking about?" Captain Rodriguez turned back to Victoria with a smile that could have cut glass. "Ms. Ashworth, you requested not to sit next to this passenger. We have granted your request. Dr. Williams is being moved." "But," Victoria sputtered, That's rewarding her." "What about me? I'm the one with standards. I'm the Diamond Medallion member." Maya stepped forward, holding a new boarding pass in her hand. "We have a seat for you too, Ms. Ashworth." Victoria snatched the boarding pass from Maya's hand and looked at the seat assignment. Her eyes bulged as if someone had struck her. 47F. This says 47F. That's economy class middle seat, Maya confirmed with a smile that was both professional and absolutely savage. Right between a gentleman traveling with his emotional support fish and a mother with twin toddlers. It's the only other available seat on the aircraft. The first-class cabin erupted. The businessman in the gray suit started clapping. Tyler's live stream exploded with comments and hearts as viewers witnessed karma in real time. Even the elderly couple in row 1 was chuckling softly. Victoria stood frozen, her face cycling through disbelief, rage, and dawning horror. "This is a joke. This has to be a joke. You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious," Captain Rodriguez said. "Ms. Ashworth, you created a disturbance. You harassed a fellow passenger based on her race. Under Federal Aviation Administration regulations, I have the authority to remove you from this flight entirely for disruptive behavior. However, since we are already behind schedule due to your actions, I am offering you a choice." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "You can take seat 47F, or you can deplane right now and wait for tomorrow morning's flight. Those are your only 2 options." Victoria looked toward the open aircraft door, then back at the luxurious first-class seat she was being forced to vacate. The merger meeting was in 8 hours. Missing this flight would mean missing the deal, missing her promotion, missing everything she had worked for. "I paid $6,000 for first class," she said, her voice rising to a near shriek. "I will sue this airline into bankruptcy. I'll sue all of you personally. I know people. I know. The CEO of this airline." "You're welcome to take that up with customer service when we land," Maya said pleasantly. "Right now, you're blocking the aisle and preventing us from departing. 47F or D-plane. Choose." Amara, who had been watching this entire exchange with growing amazement, looked at Captain Rodriguez. "Captain, you really don't have to do this for me. I can handle difficult people." "Dr. Williams," Captain Rodriguez said softly with respect, "this isn't just about you. This is about every passenger who has ever been made to feel unwelcome because of who they are. Today, on my aircraft, discrimination doesn't fly." He gestured toward the front of the plane. "Your suite is waiting." Amara looked at Victoria one last time. There was no triumph in her expression, no gloating, no satisfaction. Just a profound sadness for someone who had chosen to make their own life smaller and meaner, when it could have been so much easier to simply coexist. "Mrs. Ashworth," Amara said quietly, "I hope your day gets better." Then she walked toward the private suite, the heavy curtain swishing closed behind her with a sound like justice being served. Victoria was left standing alone in the aisle, stripped of her dignity, surrounded by passengers who were openly laughing and applauding. Every phone in first class was pointed at her, every camera capturing her humiliation for posterity. "Miss Ashworth," Maya said, pointing toward the back of the aircraft, "your walk begins that way." Victoria's hands were shaking as she grabbed her Louis Vuitton bag, knuckles white against the expensive leather. The walk from row 2 to row 47 had never seemed longer in the history of commercial aviation. Every step was a symphony of humiliation orchestrated by the clicking of her Louboutin heels against the aircraft floor, and conducted by the whispers, gasps, and barely contained laughter of every passenger she passed. Row 5. Business class passengers lowering their laptops to stare openly. Row 10. Premium economy travelers nudging each other and pointing. Row 15. A teenager with purple hair shouting karma loudly enough for half the plane to hear. Row 25. Economy passengers pulling out their phones to record the spectacle of a woman in a $6,000 outfit being marched to the back like a criminal. Tyler Brooks kept his camera trained on Victoria's retreat, his live stream now reaching unprecedented numbers. 200,000 viewers and climbing. He whispered excitedly to his audience. The hashtag #StandardsGate is trending worldwide. This is the most savage airline response I've ever seen. Victoria's world was crumbling in real time, broadcast to hundreds of thousands of strangers who were watching her fall from grace with the kind of fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. Her carefully constructed image, built over decades of ruthless ambition and strategic networking, was being demolished with each step toward the back of the plane. Row 35. The smell of economy class hit her like a physical wall. It was the scent of humanity compressed into uncomfortable spaces of microwaved meals and recycled air and dreams deferred. Victoria had never smelled it before, and her stomach churned with revulsion. Row 40. Getting closer now. The armrests were smaller, the seats more cramped, the overhead bins stuffed to capacity with oversized luggage that didn't fit properly. This was a world Victoria had never inhabited, never even acknowledged existed. Row 45. Almost there. Victoria could hear crying babies, smell someone's fish sandwich, see a man in a stained t-shirt reading a paperback novel with bent corners. These were not her people. This was not her standard. Row 47 hell. Seat 47. A was occupied by a large man named Dave, who appeared to be in his 50s wearing a tracksuit that had seen better days and eating what smelled like a tuna and onion sandwich. His emotional support animal, as Maya had mentioned, was indeed a fish. A small goldfish in a portable tank that he had secured in the seat pocket in front of him. Seat 47C was occupied by Sarah Martinez, an exhausted-looking woman in her early 30s who was traveling alone with twin 2-year-olds. One child was crying at a frequency that seemed specifically designed to shatter glass, while the other was systematically destroying a packet of crackers and spreading the crumbs across every available surface. And there, squeezed between these two circles of economy-class hell, was seat 47F, the middle seat, Victoria's new home for the next 7 hours. "Excuse me," Victoria muttered through gritted teeth, trying to squeeze past Dave and his fish tank. Dave looked up from his sandwich, chewing slowly. "You the lady from first class who got moved back here?" Victoria didn't answer. She couldn't answer. She was afraid that if she opened her mouth, she might start screaming and never stop. "Heard you didn't want to sit next to a black lady." Dave continued taking another bite of his aggressively aromatic sandwich. "That's some messed up stuff right there." Sarah looked up from bouncing her crying child. "Wait, you're the racist from first class? The one they caught on video?" Victoria's face burned with humiliation. "I wasn't. It's not what... I maintained standards and..." Lady Sarah interrupted. "The only standard you maintained was being a terrible person. Now sit down and shut up. My kids need to sleep, and I don't need your drama making things worse." Victoria squeezed into the middle seat, her designer blazer immediately bunching up around her shoulders. Her knees hit the seat in front of her. Dave's elbow encroached at least 3 inches into her space. The crying baby to her right reached out and grabbed the sleeve of her silk blouse with sticky fingers. "Can you control your child?" Victoria hissed, yanking her arm away. "This is silk. Do you know how much this cost?" Sarah, who looked like she hadn't slept since the twins were born, turned bloodshot eyes toward Victoria. "Lady, I've been traveling for 12 hours with 2 toddlers, no help, and a connecting flight that got delayed. Unless you want to hold one of them, I suggest you shut your mouth and deal with it." Victoria gasped at the rudeness, the sheer audacity of being spoken to this way. In her world, people deferred to her, accommodated her, respected her position. Here in row 47, she was just another passenger, and not even a particularly welcome one. She reached for the flight attendant call button, pressing it repeatedly. Once, twice, 5 times in rapid succession. She was accustomed to immediate service, to having her needs anticipated before she even expressed them. In first class, a raised eyebrow brought champagne. Here, apparently, she was invisible. 10 minutes passed. 15. Finally, a flight attendant appeared. Not Maya, but a younger man named Tyler, who looked like he was running on 4 hours of sleep and industrial-strength coffee. "Yes, ma'am. I pressed the call button 20 minutes ago." Victoria said, her voice dripping with indignation. "I need a glass of Chardonnay immediately, and I want to file a formal complaint about the smell of that sandwich." She pointed accusingly at Dave. Tyler looked at Dave, who shrugged and took another bite. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we haven't started beverage service for this section yet. The cart will be coming through in about an hour, and I can't tell passengers what to eat. Do you know who I am?" Victoria tried her greatest hit, the line that had opened doors and moved mountains throughout her career. Tyler's expression didn't change. "You're the lady who held up departure because you refused to sit in first class next to a black passenger. Word travels fast on an aircraft, ma'am. Please keep your seatbelt fastened until the captain turns off the seatbelt sign." He walked away without another word, leaving Victoria sitting in stunned silence. She was a pariah, a social outcast, the villain of a story that was being told and retold by every passenger on the plane. Meanwhile, 70 feet forward in the captain's private suite, the atmosphere was completely different. Dr. Amara Williams was reclining in what was essentially a small bedroom, complete with a lie-flat bed, premium linens, and a view of the clouds that seemed almost private. The noise of the engines was just a distant hum here, filtered through superior insulation and the kind of acoustic engineering that money could buy. Maya appeared with a glass of champagne and a warm towel. "Dr. Williams, I cannot apologize enough for what you experienced back there. Are you comfortable? Is there anything else I can bring you?" Amara accepted the champagne with a grateful smile. "Please call me Amara, and you have nothing to apologize for. You and Captain Rodriguez handled that situation with more grace and professionalism than I could have managed." Maya settled into the chair across from the bed. "Can I ask what you do? I mean, obviously you're a doctor, but Victoria seemed to think she was more important than you." Amara laughed, a sound like warm honey. "I'm a corporate lawyer and consultant. I specialize in mergers and acquisitions, particularly in the financial sector. I'm actually flying to London for a business meeting. Anyone we'd know?" "Well," Amara said thoughtfully, "I'm meeting with a company called Whitfield and Associates about a potential acquisition." Maya's eyes widened. "Wait, isn't that where Victoria works?" "Yes." Amara's smile was enigmatic. "Small world, isn't it?" Back in economy hell, Victoria was discovering new levels of misery. The passenger in front of her had reclined his seat fully, crushing her laptop screen down to a 45-degree angle and making work impossible. Dave had finished his tuna sandwich and moved on to a hard-boiled egg, the sulfurous smell making Victoria gag into her lavender-scented handkerchief. She tried to focus on the London meeting, visualizing the boardroom where she would close the biggest deal of her career. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of the passengers who had watched her walk of shame. She heard their laughter, saw their cameras, felt the weight of their judgment. Her phone buzzed with notifications. Text messages from colleagues who had seen the videos, social media alerts showing her face attached to hashtags like #StandardsGate and #FirstClassFail. News outlets were already picking up the story, writing headlines about viral airline justice and corporate racism. Victoria's world was burning, and she was trapped in a middle seat, watching it happen in real time. The beverage cart finally reached row 47 after what felt like 17 hours, but was actually only 90 minutes. Victoria practically lunged for the flight attendant, a tired-looking woman named Jennifer, who had clearly heard about the passenger in 47F. "I need alcohol," Victoria said desperately. "Wine, whiskey, anything. This has been the worst day of my life." Jennifer consulted her tablet. "I can offer you a mini bottle of wine for $12 or a cocktail for $15. $12 for a mini bottle." Victoria was aghast. "In first class, the alcohol is complimentary." "This isn't first class," Jennifer said flatly. "Would you like to purchase a beverage or not?" Victoria fumbled for her credit card, her hands still shaking from stress and humiliation. The wine was terrible, a Chardonnay that tasted like it had been made in someone's bathtub, but she drank it anyway, hoping for some relief from the nightmare her life had become. Meanwhile, Amara was enjoying a meal that would have been impressive in a high-end restaurant. Maya had personally served her a selection of artisanal cheeses, fresh fruit, and a wine that probably cost more than Victoria's entire economy-class meal service. But more importantly, she was enjoying the peace and quiet, the ability to think and plan without being subjected to hatred and discrimination. Her phone buzzed with a message from her assistant in London, saw the news coverage. "Are you all right? The Whitfield meeting is still scheduled for 2 p.m. local time." Amara smiled and typed back, "I'm fine. The meeting should be very interesting." 3 hours into the flight, Victoria's situation had somehow managed to get worse. The crying baby had thrown up on her shoes. Her $600 Louboutins were now stained with something that smelled like sour milk and despair. Dave had fallen asleep and was snoring like a freight train, his head lolling onto Victoria's shoulder. The fish tank was somehow emanating a smell that suggested its filtration system was not quite up to the task of 7-hour international travel. Victoria needed to use the restroom, but getting out of her seat required disturbing both Dave and Sarah, who had finally gotten both twins to sleep. She sat there, uncomfortable and desperate, watching the minutes tick by on her expensive watch. When she finally couldn't wait any longer, the process of extracting herself from row 47 was like performing surgery in a minefield. Dave grumbled and shifted, knocking over his empty sandwich wrapper. Sarah's carefully balanced sleeping children stirred ominously. Victoria stepped over diaper bags and travel pillows and scattered goldfish crackers, finally making it to the aisle after what felt like an eternity. The economy-class restroom was tiny, smelling of industrial disinfectant and the collective desperation of 300 passengers. Victoria looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her perfect hair was flat on one side from leaning against the inadequate headrest. Her makeup was smudged from stress and the recycled air. Her silk blouse was wrinkled and stained. "I am Victoria Ashworth," she whispered to her reflection, trying to summon some of her old confidence. "I am a successful businesswoman. I maintain standards. This is temporary. This is just temporary." But even as she said the words, she could feel them ringing hollow. Her standards had led her here to this tiny bathroom in economy class, broadcasting her humiliation to the world. When she returned to her seat, she found that Dave had spread out even further in her absence, and one of Sarah's twins had woken up and was systematically shredding the safety information card, while the other one stared at Victoria with the unblinking intensity of a tiny predator. Victoria squeezed back into her seat, closed her eyes, and tried to transport herself mentally to the London boardroom, where she would salvage her career and her reputation. She had no idea that the woman she would be pitching to was currently enjoying champagne and 5-star service just 70 feet away, planning her own approach to what would be the most important meeting of both their lives. The hashtag #StandardsGate continued to trend worldwide, with millions of people sharing their own stories of discrimination and praising Skylight Airways for their response. Victoria's name and face were becoming synonymous with corporate racism and entitled behavior, while Amara was being celebrated as a symbol of grace under pressure. 4 hours to London. 4 hours until Victoria would discover just how much her standards had actually cost her. In the captain's suite, Amara was reviewing documents for the meeting, making notes on her tablet about the acquisition strategy that would change both companies forever. She had no idea that the woman who had called her unsuitable and demanded her removal from first class was about to walk into a boardroom and pitch her on a partnership worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Justice Amara reflected as she sipped her wine and watched the clouds below, sometimes had a sense of irony that no screenwriter could have invented. The plane flew on through the night, carrying its passengers toward a destination where consequences would be served as efficiently as first-class champagne. The descent into London Heathrow was turbulent, both meteorologically and metaphorically. As the aircraft bucked and swayed through the gray cloud layer above England, Victoria gripped the armrests of her economy seat so tightly that her knuckles went white. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was clinging to the same type of armrest she had refused to share with Amara just hours earlier. When the wheels finally touched down on British soil, Victoria felt no relief, only a frantic urgency that bordered on panic. The delay at JFK, combined with her in-flight humiliation, meant they were landing 40 minutes behind schedule. Her meeting with Reynolds Financial Group was scheduled for 2 p.m. London time, and she had exactly 2 hours to clear customs, get into the city, shower, change clothes, and somehow salvage what remained of her professional reputation. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow." Maya's voice came over the intercom, sounding fresh and professional despite the long flight. "Please remain seated until the captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. Thank you for flying with Skylight Airways." The moment the seatbelt sign chimed off, Victoria was on her feet, grabbing her carry-on bag from the overhead compartment. She tried to push past the other passengers in economy, but the deplaning process was agonizingly slow. Everyone ahead of her seemed to be moving in slow motion, wrestling with oversized bags, checking for forgotten items, saying goodbye to seatmates they'd befriended during the flight. "Excuse me, I have a connection." Victoria lied desperately, trying to squeeze past a family struggling with their luggage. "We all have connections." "Lady, a man called back. Wait your turn." Victoria was trapped in the cattle call of economy deplaning, watching precious minutes tick away, while her future slipped through her fingers like sand. Meanwhile, at the front of the aircraft, Amara's experience was entirely different. Captain Rodriguez personally escorted her off the plane, carrying her bag himself as they walked through the empty first-class cabin. "Dr. Williams, it has been an honor having you aboard," the captain said warmly. "I've radioed ahead to ground services. There's a car waiting for you at the gate, and we've arranged for expedited immigration processing." "Thank you, Captain," Amara replied, looking refreshed despite the long flight. "And thank you for handling that situation with such professionalism. It meant more to me than you know." "We don't tolerate intolerance on my aircraft," Captain Rodriguez said with a smile. "Have a wonderful meeting in London." Amara walked off the plane, first breathing in the cool London air as she stepped onto the jet bridge. A uniformed ground service agent was waiting with a sign that read VIP, Dr. Williams, and within minutes she was seated in a luxury car heading toward central London. Behind her, the deplaning process continued at its glacial pace. Victoria was still trapped in row 47, watching helplessly as everyone in front of her took their time collecting their belongings. By the time she finally made it off the aircraft, nearly 30 minutes had passed since landing. Heathrow Airport is a labyrinth designed by architects who clearly had a sadistic sense of humor. Victoria ran through endless corridors, her damaged Louboutins clicking frantically against the polished floor. Her expensive carry-on bag, which had seemed so elegant and manageable in first class, now felt like an anchor dragging behind her. The immigration queue for non-EU citizens was massive, snaking back and forth like a concrete river of exhausted travelers. Victoria tried to cut to the front, waving her platinum frequent flyer card like a magic talisman. "Excuse me, I'm a business traveler with an urgent meeting," she announced to the immigration officer. "Back of the queue, madam," the officer replied without looking up from his computer. "Everyone here has somewhere to be." Victoria let out a sound somewhere between a groan and a scream, trudging to the back of the line behind a group of university students who seemed to find her obvious distress highly entertaining. 45 minutes later, Victoria finally cleared immigration and burst through the arrivals doors into the main terminal. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, and there was still a faint aroma of economy-class desperation clinging to her designer clothes. She spotted her driver holding a sign with her name and rushed toward him like a drowning woman reaching for a life preserver. "Move." "We need to go right now," she commanded, not bothering with pleasantries. Arthur, the driver, was a consummate professional who had seen every type of passenger emergency over his 20-year career. He took one look at Victoria's manic state and simply nodded, leading her toward the car park. "Traffic is quite heavy into the city, Ms. Ashworth," he said diplomatically as they reached his black Mercedes. "It'll be at least an hour to central London." "I don't accept that," Victoria shrieked, diving into the back seat. "Drive on the sidewalk if you have to. I have the most important meeting of my life in 90 minutes, and I cannot be late." As the Mercedes pulled away from Heathrow, Victoria's phone finally got a clear signal and exploded with notifications. Missed calls from her assistant. Mark text messages from colleagues and social media alerts that made her stomach drop to her shoes. She dialed Mark's number with shaking fingers. Victoria Mark's voice was tight with anxiety. "Thank God you're calling. Where are you?" "The partners are already in the boardroom. Mr. Whitfield flew in from Zurich unexpectedly. He wants to sit in on the Reynolds meeting personally." Victoria's blood ran cold. Jonathan Whitfield, the founder and CEO, never attended these mid-level acquisition meetings. His presence meant this deal was even bigger than she had realized, which made her current situation exponentially more catastrophic. "Is the client there?" Victoria asked, dreading the answer. "Dr. Reynolds?" "No, her team said she was delayed by a flight issue but should arrive shortly." "Victoria, there's something else you need to know. The video from your flight is everywhere. It's trending on every social platform. The office phones haven't stopped ringing with media requests." Victoria felt the world tilt around her. "What video?" "The airline incident." "Someone filmed you?" "Well, everything you said to that woman. It's got millions of views. The partners are in damage control mode." Victoria's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. Her carefully constructed life was collapsing in real time, and she was trapped in London traffic, powerless to stop it. "Listen to me carefully, Mark," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Prepare the conference room exactly as planned. Have my backup blazer ready in my office. I'll change when I get there. And Mark, not a word about the video to the client. This deal is too important." She hung up and stared out the window at the gray London suburbs rolling by. She had built her entire career on the premise that she was better than other people, that her standards elevated her above the common masses. Now those same standards were about to destroy everything she had worked for. What Victoria didn't know was that Dr. Amara Williams was already in London, already prepared for the meeting, and already fully aware of exactly who would be walking into that boardroom. Amara's car had taken a different route, avoiding the main traffic arteries that were clogging up Victoria's journey. She was currently sitting in a quiet cafe across the street from the Whitfield & Associates building, sipping an excellent espresso and reviewing the final details of what would be the most satisfying business meeting of her career. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "All documents ready for signing. Legal team standing by." "Are you sure you want to proceed with the acquisition given the circumstances?" Amara typed back. "More sure than ever. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way." She looked up at the gleaming glass tower that housed Whitfield and Associates, thinking about the woman who was probably racing through London traffic at this very moment, unaware that her victim from seat 2A was about to become her judge, jury, and professional executioner. Back in the Mercedes, Victoria was having what could only be described as a controlled breakdown. She was frantically applying makeup in the back seat, trying to repair the damage of 7 hours in economy class while the car lurched through London traffic. "Can't this thing go any faster?" she demanded, watching the clock on her phone tick toward 2 p.m. "I'm doing my best, madam," Arthur replied diplomatically, navigating through a particularly dense cluster of black cabs and red buses. Victoria's phone rang. It was Mark again. "The client just arrived," he said breathlessly. "She's in the building now. Mr. Whitfield is asking where you are." "I'm 5 minutes away," Victoria lied, staring at the traffic jam stretching endlessly ahead of them. "Tell them I was delayed by additional security screening at the airport. Make it sound official and unavoidable." "Got it," Mark said. "Victoria, one more thing. This Dr. Reynolds, she's not what I expected. She's impressive. Really impressive." "What do you mean?" "I mean she walked into this building like she owns it. The partners are treating her like royalty. This isn't just any acquisition target. I think she might be someone really important." Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with London's autumn weather. "Important how, I don't know, but Mr. Whitfield personally greeted her at the elevator. I've never seen him do that for anyone." The call ended, leaving Victoria alone with her racing thoughts and the horrible certainty that this day was about to get much worse. The Mercedes finally pulled up to the Whitfield & Associates building at 2:15 p.m., 15 minutes late for the most important meeting of Victoria's career. She threw a handful of pounds at Arthur and ran toward the revolving doors, her damaged shoes clicking frantically against the marble lobby floor. The elevator ride to the 45th floor felt like an eternity. Victoria caught her reflection in the mirrored walls and winced. Despite her frantic repairs, she still looked like someone who had been through an ordeal. Her hair was flat, her eyes were bloodshot from stress, and there was a coffee stain on her cuff from the turbulence. The elevator dinged open onto the plush reception area of Whitfield and Associates. Mark was waiting for her, holding a fresh blazer and looking like he might faint from anxiety. "Thank God you're here," he whispered, thrusting the blazer at her. "The bathroom is right there. They're waiting for you in conference room A." Victoria ducked into the bathroom and changed blazers with the efficiency of a NASCAR pit crew. She splashed cold water on her face, reapplied her lipstick, and practiced her pitch in the mirror. "You are Victoria Ashworth," she told her reflection. "You are the best acquisition specialist in New York. You close deals. You win." But even as she spoke the words, she could see the doubt in her own eyes. This morning she had been confident, arrogant, certain of her superiority. Now she felt like she was walking toward her own execution. She walked out of the bathroom, smoothed her skirt, and approached the frosted glass doors of conference room A. She could see silhouettes inside, the partners, the client, her entire future hanging in the balance. "Showtime," she whispered to herself and pushed open the doors. The conference room was exactly as she had left it that morning. Mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking London's financial district. At the head of the table sat Jonathan Whitfield, looking stern and expectant. Around him were the other senior partners, their faces unreadable. And at the far end of the table, with her back to the door, sat the client. Dr. Reynolds was examining documents, her head down, dark hair falling forward to obscure her face. "Gentlemen," Victoria announced, forcing confidence into her voice, "my deepest apologies for the delay. You will not believe the nightmare journey I've had getting here." She set down her briefcase and began her practiced routine. "I was subjected to the most appalling treatment by airline security, completely discriminatory behavior that delayed my departure and made it impossible to arrive on time. I intend to file a formal complaint with the aviation authorities." The partners exchanged glances. Victoria was already lying, already making excuses, already trying to position herself as the victim of circumstances beyond her control. "Dr. Reynolds," Victoria continued, still addressing the back of the client's head, "I cannot apologize enough for keeping you waiting, but I can promise you that Whitfield and Associates maintains the highest standards of professionalism, and I'm here to show you why we're the perfect firm to handle your acquisition needs." The woman at the end of the table slowly turned around. Victoria's voice died in her throat. The blood drained from her face so quickly she thought she might faint. Standing up from the chair, elegant and composed in a Navy power suit that cost more than Victoria's monthly salary, was Dr. Amara Williams, the same woman from seat 2A, the same woman Victoria had called unsuitable, the same woman she had demanded be removed from her presence because of her race. But this wasn't the simply dressed traveler from the airplane. This was Dr. Amara Williams in her full professional glory, tailored to perfection, radiating the kind of quiet authority that comes from owning boardrooms rather than just visiting them. "Ms. Ashworth Amara," said her voice calm and professional. "What an unexpected pleasure to see you again so soon." The room fell silent. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Her worst nightmare wasn't just coming true. It was being served to her on a silver platter in front of the most important people in her professional life. Again, Jonathan Whitfield asked, looking between the two women with growing confusion. "You two know each other. Victoria's career, her reputation, her entire future hung in the balance of how she answered that question. And judging by the slight smile playing at the corners of Amara's mouth, she knew exactly how devastating the truth was going to be. The silence in the conference room was so complete that Victoria could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, waiting for an explanation that she couldn't possibly give without destroying herself completely. Victoria started, her voice cracking like thin ice. On the flight." Amara stood gracefully, her movements controlled and elegant. She walked around the conference table with the confidence of someone who belonged in boardrooms who commanded them. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone used to being listened to and respected. "Mr. Whitfield." Amara said perhaps I should clarify the situation. Miss Ashworth and I were indeed on the same flight from New York. She made quite an impression. Victoria's face cycled through several shades of white as she realized that Amara held her entire future in her hands. The same hands that Victoria had refused to share an armrest with just hours earlier. "Dr. Reynolds," Victoria said desperately. "There seems to be some confusion about what happened on that flight. I think there might have been a misunderstanding." Amara smiled, and it was the kind of smile that sharks probably wore right before they struck. "Oh, there was no misunderstanding, Miss Ashworth. You were quite clear about your feelings." She turned to address the room. "Gentlemen, I believe in transparency in all business dealings. So let me share exactly what happened on flight SC447 this morning." Victoria felt the floor tilting beneath her feet. "Dr. Reynolds, please, if we could discuss this privately." "No," Amara said firmly. "This is a business meeting, and this is very much a business matter." She walked to the window, looking out over London's financial district as she spoke. "Ms. Ashworth refused to sit next to me in first class because of my race. She demanded that the flight crew remove me, calling me unsuitable and questioning whether I belonged in premium seating. When asked directly, she stated that she refused to sit next to a black woman because it was, in her words, unsanitary." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. The partners sat in stunned silence, their faces reflecting varying degrees of horror and disbelief. Jonathan Whitfield looked like someone had hit him with a cricket bat. "She referred to me as an affirmative action case." Amara continued, her voice never rising above conversational level. "She demanded that I be moved to economy class so she could sit with people of her own caliber." Victoria's legs gave out. She collapsed into the nearest chair, her face now completely drained of color. "I was tired," she whispered. "I was stressed about this meeting. I wasn't thinking clearly. It's not who I am." Amara turned from the window, fixing Victoria with a look that was both sad and steel-hard. "But it is who you are, Ms. Ashworth. Because when you were tired and stressed, when you thought no one important was watching, you showed your true character. You chose to be cruel. You chose to be hateful. You chose to try to humiliate someone you didn't even know." She walked back to her seat, settling into the chair with the composure of someone completely in control of the situation. The flight crew handled it beautifully, by the way. Captain Rodriguez and flight attendant Maya Santos upheld the highest standards of professionalism while making it very clear that discrimination would not be tolerated. "Dr. Reynolds," Jonathan Whitfield said, his voice strained, "I cannot begin to apologize for Miss Ashworth's behavior. This is absolutely not representative of our firm's values." "Isn't it?" Amara asked quietly. "Because Miss Ashworth has worked here for 12 years. She's been promoted repeatedly. She's been given positions of responsibility and authority. If this is how she treats strangers on airplanes, how has she been treating your clients, your employees, your vendors?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Victoria could see the partners looking at her differently now, remembering incidents, reconsidering interactions, wondering what they had missed or chosen to ignore. Jonathan Victoria pleaded, turning to her boss with tears in her eyes. "You know me. You know my work. You know what I've brought to this firm. This was one moment, one mistake. It doesn't define my entire career." Jonathan Whitfield had built his firm on reputation and relationships. In the world of high-stakes mergers and acquisitions, character mattered as much as competence. A single scandal could destroy decades of careful relationship building. "Victoria," he said, slowly, Did you say those things? Did you refuse to sit next to Dr. Reynolds because of her race? Victoria looked around the room, desperately searching for any escape, any way to minimize the damage. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The truth was the truth, and it had been witnessed by hundreds of passengers and broadcast to millions of viewers. "I maintain standards," she said, finally falling back on her familiar refrain. "I've always maintained standards in every aspect of my life and my work." "Standards," Amara repeated thoughtfully. "Tell me, Ms. Ashworth, what standard was I failing to meet in seat 2? Was it the standard of being successful? Because I am. Was it the standard of being educated because I have 3 degrees from Ivy League institutions? Was it the standard of being professionally accomplished? Because I've built a consulting firm that specializes in exactly the kind of acquisition we're here to discuss." She paused, letting the words sink in. Or was it simply the standard of being white? The accusation hung in the air like a judgment. Victoria opened her mouth to deny it, to deflect, to make excuses, but no words came out. Because they all knew the answer. "Dr. Reynolds," Jonathan said carefully, "what can we do to make this right? How can Whitfield and Associates move forward from this situation?" Amara leaned back in her chair, considering. "That's an interesting question, Jonathan. You see, I came here today prepared to finalize an acquisition. My consulting firm has been looking to partner with a larger organization, and Whitfield and Associates seemed like the perfect fit." Victoria's heart leaped. Maybe there was still hope. Maybe the deal could be salvaged. "The numbers work," Amara continued. "The valuation is fair. The strategic fit is excellent. On paper, this partnership makes perfect sense." "Then let's move forward," Jonathan said eagerly. "Whatever Miss Ashworth said or did, it won't impact our ability to work together professionally." "I'm afraid it will," Amara said quietly, "because I cannot in good conscience entrust my business, my employees, and my reputation to a firm that employs someone who thinks my race makes me unsuitable for their presence." She stood up, gathering her documents. "Ms. Ashworth, you had a choice this morning. You could have simply put on your headphones and ignored me. You could have been civil. You could have even been friendly. Instead, you chose to try to humiliate someone you assumed was powerless." Victoria felt her world crumbling. "Dr. Reynolds, please. I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly. I'll take sensitivity training. I'll donate to charity. Just don't let this one mistake destroy everything." "One mistake," Amara repeated. "You called me unsanitary. You demanded my removal. You referred to me as an affirmative action case. You said you wouldn't share air with me for 7 hours. That wasn't one mistake, Ms. Ashworth. That was a pattern of behavior that revealed exactly who you are when you think there are no consequences." She turned to Jonathan. "I'll make this simple. I will not do business with any firm that employs Victoria Ashworth. Either she goes or this deal dies." The ultimatum landed in the room like a bomb. Jonathan looked at Victoria, then at the $200 million acquisition contract sitting on the table, then back at Victoria. "Jonathan," Victoria whispered, "you can't. I bring in 30% of this firm's revenue. I've been here for 12 years. You can't let her dictate our personnel decisions." Jonathan didn't hesitate, not for a second. He looked at Victoria with the cold calculation of a businessman who had just been handed an equation with a very clear solution. "Victoria Ashworth," he said formally, "you are terminated effective immediately. For cause: gross misconduct and reputational damage to the firm." Victoria gasped as if she had been physically struck. "You can't do this." I'll sue all of you, and I'll testify at any legal proceeding," Amara added helpfully. "I'm sure the flight crew from this morning would be happy to provide statements as well. The incident was recorded by multiple passengers, and has been viewed by millions of people. Your own words will be your testimony." Victoria stood up shakily, her legs barely supporting her weight. Her carefully constructed world had collapsed in the span of 10 minutes. The merger, the partnership, the career she had built over 2 decades, all of it was gone. "This is reverse racism," she said, desperately grasping for any argument that might save her. "You're discriminating against me because I'm white." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence was filled with disgust rather than shock. Even her former colleagues were looking at her with contempt now. "Ms. Ashworth," Amara said quietly, "I'm not punishing you because you're white. I'm holding you accountable because you're a racist. There's a difference, and the fact that you can't see it tells me everything I need to know about who you really are." Security arrived. 2 men in suits who had clearly been called while the meeting was in progress. They flanked Victoria, waiting for instructions. "Escort Ms. Ashworth from the building," Jonathan said without looking at her. "She's no longer an employee of this firm." Victoria grabbed her purse with shaking hands. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice lacked any conviction. "You'll regret this." "No," Amara said as Victoria was led toward the door. "I don't think we will." The door closed behind Victoria with a soft click, sealing her out of the world she had inhabited for 12 years. In the conference room, the remaining partners sat in stunned silence for a moment before Jonathan cleared his throat. "Dr. Reynolds," he said on behalf of Whitfield and Associates, "I offer my most sincere apologies. That behavior is not representative of our values or our culture." "I believe you," Amara said, settling back into her chair, "which is why I'm still willing to discuss this acquisition. But I have some conditions regarding your hiring practices and diversity initiatives." "Whatever you want," Jonathan said immediately. Amara smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. "Then let's talk business. I think we're going to work very well together." 3 hours later, Amara walked out of the Whitfield and Associates building with a signed acquisition agreement worth $200 million. She had not only secured the deal she came for, but she had also ensured that Victoria Ashworth would never again be in a position to discriminate against anyone. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya Santos, saw the news coverage about the meeting. "How did it go?" Amara typed back. "Justice was served. Thank you for everything you did this morning." "What about Victoria? Any regrets?" Amara paused, thinking about the question as her car pulled away from the building. "None," she replied. "Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, and some people need to face real consequences before they understand that their actions matter." She looked up at the London skyline, thinking about the day's events. Victoria had lost her job, her reputation, and her future because she couldn't see past the color of someone's skin. Meanwhile, Amara had gained a new business partnership and the satisfaction of knowing that discrimination had been met with swift and appropriate consequences. As her car headed toward Heathrow for the return flight to New York, Amara reflected on the strange turns that life could take. This morning she had been just another passenger trying to get to London. Tonight she was returning home as the owner of one of the most prestigious investment firms in Europe. The most satisfying part wasn't the business success, though. It was knowing that somewhere in London, Victoria Ashworth was learning that in a connected world, being cruel to strangers could have consequences that followed you everywhere you went. Victoria, meanwhile, was indeed somewhere in London, specifically in a cheap hotel near Heathrow, trying to book a flight home on her personal credit card since her corporate travel account had been canceled. Her phone was dead because she couldn't bear to read any more social media comments about her behavior. Her career was over. Her reputation was destroyed. Her carefully constructed life of standards and superiority had crumbled in a single day. As she sat alone in a budget hotel room that smelled of stale cigarettes and broken dreams, Victoria finally understood the true cost of her standards. They had cost her everything that mattered, and all because she couldn't share an armrest with someone whose only crime was existing while black. The lesson was simple, but it had taken the destruction of her entire life for her to learn it. Treating people with basic human dignity isn't about maintaining standards. It's about being human. And sometimes, when you forget how to be human, the world has a way of reminding you exactly what that costs. Here's what strikes me most about this story. Victoria had everything. Success, respect, financial security, a career that most people would kill for. And she threw it all away because she couldn't stand the sight of a successful black woman in first class. The key lessons here are powerful and universal. First, your true character emerges under pressure. When Victoria was stressed about her big meeting, instead of rising to the occasion, she revealed her worst impulses. Second, dignity and grace will always triumph over hatred and entitlement. Amara never lowered herself to Victoria's level, yet she achieved total victory simply by being professional and letting Victoria's own words speak for themselves. Most importantly, this story reminds us that in our interconnected world, there are real consequences for cruel behavior. Victoria thought she was punching down at someone powerless, but she was actually destroying her own future. The person you disrespect today might be the person holding your career in their hands tomorrow. My advice: don't be Victoria. When you see someone succeeding, celebrate them, or at minimum, mind your own business. True class isn't about designer labels or platinum cards. It's about how you treat people when you think nobody's watching. Because in 2024, somebody's always watching and the internet never forgets.